they have, continuity of healthcare treatment. Overdoses, people who, right when they get out of prison the first month, are dozens times more likely to die of drug overdoses than your average person. So we got to make sure that they've got medication-assisted treatment to help them adjust, back to society and not let the pressures and anxiety of reentry lead them to a mistake, especially those who have substance use disorder. We've got to provide housing for people who are coming home, or assist them so that they have a stable, decent place to live. We've got to help with food insecurity so they're not hungry. There are so many different realms, whether it's healthcare, education, employment, hunger, so many, issues that plague folks who are coming home. And we've got to have the right behavioral health treatment. For such a high percentage of people who are incarcerated, they have, different mental health disorders. And if those are not adequately addressed, which I can guarantee you in prison, they're typically not. Most people who come into prison already are suffering from trauma due to adverse childhood experiences. And that trauma is usually exacerbated by the dehumanizing experiences of prison. And when that is exacerbated, it usually leads to more severe difficulties readjusting and successfully reentering society. So we have to have counseling and behavioral health treatment both in prison and upon reentry.
I know something about prisons in the Scandinavian countries and in Germany because I created a class that I teach in Florida called Justice Around the World. And I compared our prison system and all of the pieces of it to those in the Scandinavian countries and in Germany particularly. And they just outdistance us. And why do you think that is, that those countries are so far ahead of us in just what you've described? And why are we lagging so far behind?
Well, I think we've got just a cultural issue here in this country where we have long, and I'm talking about for centuries, viewed prison as in a very punitive way. We have sort of a vengeful strain in our culture. Whereas in some of those other cultures, it's more like, okay, you screwed up, how can we fix it? As opposed to, you screwed up, how can we punish you? And, there's a lot of things about prison, not just the crappy food or the lack of, educational opportunities or lack of meaningful counseling in most prisons, but, the entire environment, and even in many places, the tolerance of sexual assault. And it's almost as if you want to use the horror of prisons as a deterrent to say, it's not bad enough that you have to go away from society for a long time. We want to make it so that you are so fearful of what could happen to you there that you won't commit a crime. And that's culturally a very different attitude than they have in Europe, in most of Europe, where, it's not that prisons are country clubs, but in many places in Europe, you go into a prison, you wear your own clothes. They don't take your clothes and they don't take your identity and call you a number. You bring a suitcase in, you wear your clothes, you keep your identity. It's not completely stripping you of your dignity as well as your clothes the minute you get in there, because that obviously doesn't do anything good for you when you are just systematically dehumanized. That's so true. I think, just we need I think cultural just a shift in our view of what prisons are supposed to accomplish. They shouldn't primarily be about vengeance. They should primarily be about attempting rehabilitation, as is successful in many other countries.
Very, very true. Yeah. That is very much what I uncovered, that there's a film that Michael Moore made, and he goes from country to country and takes you into the prisons, Norway, Germany. And when you hear him interview the guards, they say that human dignity is number one on our list. So that's their attitude. So you come in with that attitude, and that is the way you're treated. And it's completely different here. So I think it becomes a whole change in your attitude, and that's very much what you're saying. This stripping of humanity is just it's degrading, really is. Are there specific issues that you feel strongly about, other than the many that you've already mentioned? What would they be in terms of our prison system? Any other issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got to do better by our COs. As long as COs make as little money as they do, it's not going to be a very attractive job. And as as horrible as the experience of being incarcerated is, COs get to go home, but they spend 40 or more hours of their life every week in a pretty miserable place. And if we improve salaries, training, educational opportunities for COs, they would probably be better able to understand how traumatized most of the people they guard are, and would probably treat them in a more humane way that would reduce the likelihood that people leave prison alienated and furious at the system and more damaged than they were when they went in.
Right, right. One of the things I recall from that film that Michael Moore did is the COs were trained for 2 years, and they took psychology classes. That doesn't happen here. So they were able to understand the people that they were responsible for. I think that's non-existent here, really. What is possible? That's the key word to do about these issues. And I think about how close we are to the next election. What is possible in terms of change in our criminal justice system?
So I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think a lot is possible, and here's why.
Oh, great.
Because as polarized as the two parties are, criminal justice reform is like the one issue that people of both parties seem to agree on these days. Most Democrats approach this from the perspective of, hey, let's try to have a more humanitarian criminal justice system in many of the ways that we've talked about today. Although that may not be the natural instinct of all Republicans of all different strains have compelling philosophical reasons to support criminal justice reform. If you are a evangelical Christian Republican, then you will want to help save souls, and you will want to help reconnect most people in the lives of their children, which our current criminal justice system tears people away from their children and for long periods of time, and makes it more likely that the kids end up in prison eventually too. And so you have a compelling reason to want to bridge that divide and reunite families. If you are a fiscal conservative Republican, you have compelling reasons not to want to spend $80+ billion a year locking people up. As I said in the last episode, locking up a much higher percentage of our people than any other country in the history of the world. We have 4% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. And right. So if you're a fiscal conservative, like Rick Perry was when he was governor of Texas, or Nathan Deal when he was governor of Georgia, or Nikki Haley when she was governor of South Carolina, 3 conservative Southern Republican governors that all led the way on criminal justice reform to save money by closing prisons and getting people back in their communities. And if you're a libertarian Republican like a Rand Paul, then you don't want to see government engaging in civil asset forfeiture and seizing all the assets of people who are suspected of having drugs and putting away people because they were selling a fistful of drugs for 15 years. That doesn't make any sense, these mandatory minimums and this huge, encroaching view of government onto people's lives. I think the decriminalization of marijuana in so many places is going to lead a trend towards, 10, 15 years from now, decriminalization of most, if not all, drugs. And so there's Republicans of all major philosophical strains of the party that are part of this criminal justice reform movement. And I think that's why I'm optimistic that we've got a chance to go further in the coming years.
That sounds good to me. What we're almost out of time, and I wanted to ask you, what are your goals, your personal goals for yourself in the next, say, 5 years?
My life, I'm very blessed. I have, I'm executive director of this statewide group that fights for affordable housing. We had a huge victory just today here in Missouri by helping reinstate, by getting the Missouri Housing Development Commission, which operates under the gubernatorial administration, to reinstate our state low-income housing tax credit program, about $150 million program facilitating development of decent, safe housing for people who are struggling. That was a huge win. Then in other work, I consult for several criminal justice reform organizations, some that work on policy, some that work directly with people coming out of prison. And I just want to keep advancing their causes. I want to get more money for reentry in Missouri. I want to encourage more employers to become second chance employers and take part in a second chance job fair that I help organize for St. Louis University to employ people. There's so much still to do, and I want to be being a part of it.
Well, you sound like you are a part of it. Sounds wonderful to me, and it was great to have you on the podcast today and last week. I thank you, Jeff, for spending your time with us, and I'm sure that people were enlightened by not just your experiences, but what you are doing today, where you are, and where you're going. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Harry. You take care.
All right. And please tune in next time to Pursuing Justice. We have some interesting guests coming up. I'm Harriet Hendel, and thanks for listening today.